are no tests. The code is calling out over HTTP and never using the result. So we've accumulated 72 expletive points.
Now comes the fun part. The fun part is to actually look at what other people do within any given exercise. So I can now submit the exercise, and to do that I run the exercism submit command. We have exactly one exercise that we've submitted, and the code that you just saw in the code editor is now on exercism.io.
The truth is, talent is bullshit. Skill can be developed systematically, and a system is awesome. A system you can understand. A system you can hack.
These were just some examples of Katrina Owen's work. Welcome to Passionate Voices. Welcome, Katrina.
Thank you.
So, Katrina, you've done a ton of interesting work, and a lot of it is themed around passion and expertise. And you talk a lot about this in your talk about hacking passion. And one of the provocative statements you make in that talk is that talent is bullshit. Can you talk a little bit about why talent is bullshit?
I think it's probably an exaggeration that talent is bullshit. I only kind of believe it. I think that great things, great accomplishments come from a lot of hard work. I think that there are some domains in life where there is some element of underlying talent that probably affects how well you do. And I'm pretty sure that in a lot of sports, there are elements of what type of, I don't know, muscle twitch fiber you have will affect how well you do in certain sports. But I think that for the most part, in most endeavors, hard work and the right type of hard work is what creates great skill.
Is that true based also on your personal experience when you were learning and trying out different things? You talk a little bit about this. You've tried a lot of things personally, right? You've tried acrobatics and acting and lots of different endeavors, some artistic, some scientific. You've gone into, you studied molecular biology. And when you apply that sort of principle of hard work, did you find this to be true for yourself as well, that the passion came with the work?
Oh, very much so. And the skill as well. I know a lot of people will say, oh, you were so smart when you were a kid. It wasn't really true. Like, I didn't work hard enough. I didn't try hard enough to really get far at anything. I might have had some facility at, I don't know, remembering details that was impressive to people, but it wasn't really anything to do with being smart or being talented. And because I thought the talent was real. Up until I was about 25, I really thought the talent was the thing that would make you a great person or give you a great life. And so I was kind of desperately searching for my talent and didn't find it. I was never really deeply skilled at anything until I started working hard.
So it's really that discovery that came with practice that really, hey, there is no magical thing here inside of me that I just have to uncover, that I have to sort of peel away. It comes with practice. It comes with trying. But why then is it that this happened for you with programming and not with some of the other things you tried? Because you say in Hacking Passion too that you worked hard at all of the things you did. What is it about programming that stuck with you?
With programming, it came after I had learned how to learn math and science. Mm-hmm. And so that systematic approach to problem solving and studying, it worked really well for me. I don't have the ability to sort of synthetically pick up the big picture and then by osmosis discover the details. I work very systematically to discover details and build up a bigger picture based on those details. And the work that I did in my late 20s to learn towards my degree taught me the skills that I needed in order to learn systematically. And I didn't apply those to, like, I never applied, even though I worked really hard, for example, at acrobatics, I didn't know how to practice. I didn't know how to approach it in a systematic way. And so I was practicing really badly. I was practicing a lot. I was practicing hard, and I was internalizing a ton of really bad habits. And so the way in which even though I practiced a lot and practiced hard, I practiced the wrong things, and I practiced them over and over again. So I got better and better at being pretty terrible.
One of the books that you suggested that I check out was the book Mastery by Robert Greene, and it's all about teaching the reader the sort of ingredients of mastery, including deliberate practice and other core skills. And at the same time, you also recommended the work by Cal Newport, who wrote a book called So Good They Can't Ignore You. And he talks a lot about how this notion of following your own passion is kind of BS, that really, to your point, it's more about getting really, really good at something and then discovering your passion within that. But Robert Greene in his book really disagrees with that. Like, he spends like an entire chapter talking about the inner force that compels us to go after something, and that we sort of should get in touch with our childhood and understand what was it like when we were little kids that really excited us, and how can we go after that again? How can we rediscover that and sort of ignore all the people around us who tell us, don't do this thing that you were excited about in your childhood, and just go after that. And you don't believe that part of what Greene is saying, right? You're more on the Newport side of that debate.
I'm very much on the Newport side of that debate, and I kind of hate to admit it, because I love Robert Greene's writing, and I find that he has so many incredibly deep insights about so many topics. And in particular, in Mastery, he talks about deliberate practice, about mentorship, about the whole process of gradual systematic skill development in a way that I find very accessible and inspiring. And so I just kind of skipped over the part where he says, follow your inner child's dream.
So what is your passion that you've developed through this process of discovery and deep learning?
I'm really passionate about the process of skill development itself. I'm not so, people ask me, so are you really passionate about teaching? Like, I couldn't care less about teaching. I care about learning. And I think that that's a very different thing. And it's not really learning in itself, it's all of the processes around skill development. How does it work? What are the models? How do different people do it? What will let other people gain the skills that I wanted to gain and didn't do correctly? What would let other people do it correctly more quickly earlier without losing a decade of, futzing around?
Yeah. Have you thought about maybe doing this as the main thing you do professionally? Or
I've thought about it. I think gradually that might happen. One of the things that Cal Newport talks about in his book is the idea of the adjacent possible. And I feel like all of the work that I've done since I started playing with programming, learning programming, working as a programmer, there have been elements of skill development and interest in ways of practicing little, apps and things that will help people practice. And I think that out of this exploration, without quitting my day job and saying, whatever, I'm going to do this full time, I think that there's a way of gradually developing all of my various interests into something that might be able to let me do it full time.
So exorcism is already kind of a big deal, right? And Wired wrote a big story about it. It's got thousands of users and lots of people submitting their results to the different exercises. I was really kind of blown away when I saw how many programming languages are actually supported by it.
Yeah, I think it's 23 active languages right now.
And can you talk a bit about the story? Like, how did it come about in the first place? How long did you have to work on it to get to that point?
Yeah, it was very accidental. Again, it grew out of some of the various threads of interest that I'd had for a while. One of them was nitpicking people's code by email, a very small set of of exercises that I would nitpick more or less on a daily basis. I did that for about 6 or 7 years. And the other process was little warm-up exercises for some students that I was helping mentor at one of the 6-7 month development training programs. And the process that I went through with those students, exercism was in part a workflow optimization. I didn't want to have to get up at, or have to commit every single day at the same time to get them their exercises in the morning. It was also a way of ensuring that they actually finished one exercise before moving on, because a lot of people wouldn't finish the exercise during the allotted half hour or whatever, and they wouldn't go back and try it later. And I thought that it was quite important for them to actually finish exercises. And then the discussion part grew out of the realization that they were doing all of these exercises, but we were never talking about what they had learned or where they got stuck or the choices that they made. And those conversations were actually the crucial part of learning. And so all of this kind of happened by accident over the course of a couple weeks, where I made the first iteration of the prototype and then just kind of released it into the wild. It didn't occur to me that there would be more than 12 or 13 people who would care deeply enough to actually use it if it wasn't just part of their daily exercise regimen. And within days, people were using it from all over the world. I remember with the second day, I looked at some of the new users, and they were from Brazil and Australia and Germany, and it was what just happened? And I had not planned for it. I didn't know how to manage it. Within 3 weeks, it hit Hacker News, and I had 1,000 people submitting code. I really didn't know how to handle it.
And did you contribute multiple programming languages from the get-go, or how did that start to happen?
It started out just in Ruby, which was what I was helping teach. And then we added JavaScript because it was kind of a stretch goal for some of the students to do some JavaScript. But then as soon as it was in the wild, people were submitting, Python, and CoffeeScript happened. Haskell happened pretty quickly. Elixir. It was a lot of fun. People got really excited about it, and they started making up their own exercises and porting existing exercises from other languages.
So one of the things that we chatted about a little bit is this notion of progression through the exercises. Right now, it's not clear to me quite as a learner, so what the underlying theory is, why am I doing this now?
Yeah.
What is the next thing, and on what basis is that the thing that's being suggested? Can you talk a little bit about what the current sort of structure of the exercises is and how you could see that evolving down the road?
Yeah. At the moment, again, it's very accidental. This has existed for 2 years now, and people have contributed all of the exercises, aside from the very first few that I contributed, our community contributed. People have added test suites and added new exercises and added new languages. The progression is very accidental. We've tried to have it be kind of a gradual progression of first you try out the language and you figure out, primitive types or core types depending on the language and basic language features. And then it builds into a little bit more elaborate language features, but still in terms of little programming challenges. And then towards the end, we'll try to introduce more of the advanced language features, like for Go, for example, there's channels and concurrency and that sort of thing towards the end.
Yeah, and it seems to me based on everything you said about exercism, that it's not just about learning to program, right? There's lots of places now where you're sort of being offered this, learn to programming JavaScript by modifying these tiny little robots moving across the screen or whatever. But through these repeated exercises where you share your results with others and you look at what other people are doing, the idea really is to develop a true sense of mastery within each of the sections that you're working in, right?
Yeah, I think the secret sauce of exorcism is the conversations that happen. Practicing, you can do that anywhere, and there are a ton of sites that give great exercises and puzzles and all sorts of interesting challenges in all sorts of languages. And I highly recommend going and looking for the types of challenges that get you interested, because that's where you're going to spend more, I guess, more cognitive resources actually thinking about it and going deep, which I think is a valuable thing. With exorcism, I think that the value in it is having the conversation, in looking at someone else's code and thinking, how would I do this differently? Why did they do it in this way? It becomes sort of a case study of trying to think out the reasoning for certain choices. Was it deliberate? Was it accidental? Did they just not know about this other library or this other way of solving it? People's experiences are so different. Like, some people have experiences that are very much in like the banks and the security and the crypto and that sort of thing, or hardware where there are very few resources and every single assignment counts, and other people are used to just like limitless resources, and it doesn't really matter because you're never going to have more than 20 people using it. It's some sort of internal reporting app, and it doesn't matter if it takes an extra minute or two. And so the trade-offs that people make when they're programming are often, they come out of all of these experiences that we've had. And so learning to see your own biases through someone else's eyes can be very, very powerful.
So I've gone through probably a dozen of the JavaScript exercises and exorcism just for fun, and I got probably a total of 2 or 3 comments through them. And the times when I got comments were mostly when I left other people comments, which was a great way. So like, once I knew that, I was like, oh, okay, so here's how it works. I have to like poke other people and then they'll poke me back. That's great.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know that. It's different in all of the languages, I think.
And but I found it the most interesting when I found these sort of rare examples where people were having a real conversation about something.
Yeah.
But part of the reason why I wasn't like going all over the place and commenting is that a lot of people just made the same mistakes over and over and over and over again. Like, just completing an exercise to make the test pass is like the most common mistake, right? Oh, it does everything the tests say it should do.
Yeah.
So it's perfect, right?
There's no generalization whatsoever. It's every single example in the big case statement that does every literal example from the test suite. Yeah.
So how do you get to that point where you get people to the conversation, so to have more of them?
I wish I knew. The only way I've known to do it is to leave comments on everyone, and then when they start having a conversation back, keep my eye on that person and kind of follow them along. And right now, there's no way in the website to follow some person. We have an open issue about wanting to have an activity stream and sort of granular notifications and all of this, but at the moment, that's a problem that I don't know how to solve, and it's probably the most important problem on exorcism right now. Actually, both of the biggest problems on exorcism right now revolve around this conversation. How do you help people have a conversation that is interesting? That's what we were talking about now. Is how do we bring that conversation to a level that's not just, oh, did you know that strings has a whatever method, but really going deep. And the other thing right now is that a lot of people don't get feedback. Like, there are so many people, there are bottlenecks in some of the languages where there are a ton of learners who are going in and doing an exercise or 2 or 3 or 10 or 12 and then not getting any feedback because there are just too few people who are then turning around and sharing their observations with someone else. And I don't know what the solution to that is. I'm working with a designer at Pivotal Labs in New York right now who's offering her time to open source, which is a rare thing in design, I think.
That's great.
And so we'll see if we can find a way of designing the experience in a way that fosters this conversation and fosters the community that is necessary in order to have these conversations in a good, healthy, safe space.
So have you thought about like just picking sort of canonical examples of, okay, this is like the most performance solution to this problem, or shortest version or the most well-documented or clever use of the map function or whatever, like just sort of the illustrative curated examples. I saw a few discussions of curations.
Yeah.
Is that something you think would be worthwhile, or does that sort of miss the point?
No, I think that would be worthwhile in many ways, actually. I think it would be worthwhile to have a gallery, once you've solved something, to go explore other solutions, even if you're not having a conversation. I think that can be truly an interesting thing. Right now, it's all a question of resources. Again, this is all open source. It's all individuals who are spending their mornings or evenings or weekends helping out. And so I think it would take an individual or a small group of individuals who want to see it happen and who help figure out what is the technical solution to make it happen. How do we have to structure how do we have to organize the work to actually discover these things and curate them, and how would you discover them once they're there? How would you in the site know that they exist and know to browse them? So
what do people need to know to help? What do people need to know to help improve the platform?
Yeah, there's actually a ton of work right now that needs to be done in order to surface all of the work that people could be contributing. I think that there's a ton. I was talking to a developer here at Pivotal Labs this morning who was, and we started talking about this idea of community. Every single language track really should have a core community, and there should be, one or two or three community managers in some way, someone who is there consistently and who cares deeply about the language and about exercism, in particular about that track. We could get sponsorship from companies to send these community managers to language-specific conferences to help get other people involved in the community part of it. I think that there's a ton of work that could be done around the community portion. There's another huge amount of work that can be done technically of improving the platform itself.
Right, and most of it is Ruby, right?
A lot of it is Ruby right now. We're talking about rewriting the API, the sort of backend API in Clojure. There's a Clojure dev who's really been contributing a lot of work to Scheme and Lisp and that. And that this is he does Clojure sort of regularly. There's some Go. The command line client is written in Go so that we can do the cross-platform compilation. But yeah, there's a lot of Ruby right now. There could be a lot more JavaScript, I think, but I don't really do JavaScript, and so it's kind of been left by the roadside. One person came in and did a lot of work to start improving the JavaScript on the site, but it requires a real API, and I've been completely swamped over the past month or two, and I've not had time to do any work on the API.
There's sort of a very, very tiny donate link at the bottom of the site saying,
yeah, I would love to. I've put quite a lot of my own money into making Exercism happen so far, and I've been unsure about how would it actually work with donations. There's a Patreon link and there's a PayPal link. And I don't even think I've set up Patreon correctly. I don't think I've actually...
No, I think it asks for how many ounces of blood of Katrina Owen do you want to support or something like that?
I have no idea how any of this works. Actually, if you want to help contribute to open source, if you can help me set up my Patreon so that it actually works, that would be a wonderful contribution.
But yeah, that is from having been in the free culture community for a long time, I'm increasingly finding people who really support themselves entirely through that model. Is that's something that you see as a potential future for yourself in this work?
I don't know if it could work. I mean, I suppose it could. I know that there are people who do it. With Exercism, it's so much bigger than just me. If Exercism is to survive and thrive, it has to be driven by the community. It can't just be me sort of trying to, herd cats or beg people for contributions, both technical and monetary. It really has to be driven by, because I don't know 23 languages. I barely know 3, and that's a lot in my life. There are people who have done like 10, 12, 13 languages on exorcism. It's kind of amazing.
Do you see exorcism as the sort of be-all, end-all for your development in hacking skills and hacking skills development?
No, not at all. It's just a tiny corner of. It's just one way. First of all, there are so many different learning styles, and I think that exorcism matches some people's learning style and not others. I think it might match several learning styles. There are people who would probably learn very much through mentorship and through the conversation, and who might not even do any exercises if they could get away with it, because it's like, boring, whatever. And other people who really like to do the same exercise in many different ways. I've seen some amazing, hilarious solutions to things in ways that it never occurred to me to try, because there are people who are really willing to push the language that they're using to the absolute edge. So I think that exorcism could match several learning styles, but it really is only two things. It's the toy program, the little example of exercise that is trivial, and that is there's no way. You can learn a lot. You can go deep, and you can discover a lot of things that are going to help you in whatever job you're doing. But it's not real code. It's not a real example. And the things you need in order to scale servers and deal with encryption and all of those things, it's not something that you're going to learn on exorcism. You're going to learn maybe how to do code review, get better, how to read somebody else's code and understand their thought processes. You might learn some empathy. You might learn how to have a polite and respectful conversation about code. You might learn some tricks of a language and how people tend to solve problems in one language or another. But there are so many other things that you need to learn, and so many other amazing resources out there to help you learn them, whether it's the sort of large scale, very academic types of programs, or it's the little games, the browser games that will teach you just one little thing, but teach it to you really well. I think that there's a wealth of opportunities there. And
you said to me that you had watched this talk by Kathy Sierra a while ago, where she talks about both sort of this notion that our cognitive attention is incredibly limited, and that what we use this for and how we use it is incredibly important. And she then goes into specifically the notion of perceptual learning, the idea of just looking at many examples of the same thing to very quickly internalize, how does this thing work? And to develop this mastery that we're going for much faster than it could be achieved by other means. Can you talk a little bit more about why you think this is so important?
Yeah, she talks about two things. She talks about the perceptual learning, which is the brain's ability to look at a lot of details and start discovering over many, many, many variations the things that don't vary. What are the invariants? What are the things that stay the same? What is the pattern that we can rely on to make a determination? And so in perceptual learning, there's an idea of the being able to distinguish the details. The brain actually optimizes for filtering out irrelevant information. So you have experts who don't even see the irrelevant information anymore because the brain is filtering it out at a pre-conscious level. And so there's this idea of the being able to distinguish the right details. And then there's this idea of fluency, of being able to do it so quickly and at an automatic level, so you're not burning cognitive resources in order to do it. And so she talks a lot about that, and it's really fascinating. And so she mentions some real world examples of it, and she also references some research that was done at UCLA by a professor named Kelman and his team there. Really interesting stuff. She also talks about the idea of taking a skill that is so small, that is so tiny, that you can go from being a novice, not knowing how to do it, right through being able to do it, but with very much conscious effort, over into being able to do it automatically without burning those cognitive resources in a very short amount of time.
50 years of research on expertise development has told us: split these things into small subtasks, sub-skills, and take those small sub-skills to C. And then suddenly you become a lot more effective and efficient.
And she gave, a rule of thumb of if you can go through that whole process from novice to expertise in 1 to 3 sessions of 45 to 90 minutes each, then the skill is small enough. And I really find that interesting. I think that being able to slice off a tiny sliver of a skill, just a splinter of a skill, and gaining that expertise means that you're not going to be futzing around in that area where you're just practicing it badly. Like I did the first 25 years of my life. I practiced everything really hard and really badly, and I made that permanent. I was permanently awful at a lot of things because I worked so hard at practicing it in the wrong way. And so if you do these tiny slivers of skill, then you're not going to be practicing it really hard the wrong way. You're going to go right over into doing it right. And I think that opens up a whole vista of possibilities in terms of programming. One of the things that Kathy talks about in her talk and in her book is that we're overwhelmed with, we're burning cognitive resources, we're leaking cognitive resources for everything that we do. And we have too many things that we need to learn every single day. And because they're piling up in this middle area where we are burning cognitive resources to do them, but we're not really moving them over into automatic, unless sometimes we move them over into the automatic, but we're doing them badly. So we've learned them badly, and we've made it automatic at this sort of half-assed level of skill. And so the idea of taking a very, very tiny sliver of skill and making that, developing expertise in that quickly is very interesting. And then the idea of using perceptual learning in this, deliberately using perceptual learning to perhaps perform that transfer, that skill development. I think both of those ideas are very powerful.
Yeah, so I mentioned to you that I'd been playing around a little bit with Nodeschool.io, and they have these interactive exercises, and they do the slicing pretty well. So you take something like, on JavaScript prototypes, which a lot of people sort of struggle with and continue to get wrong after they sort of learned it incorrectly the first time. And they have just a tiny, what they call workshop, but just to learn prototype chains and really get that sort of internalized, right? Yeah. But what they don't do is the perceptual learning piece, which, as I understand from Kathy Sierra, the idea really is to get into that mode where your brain kind of starts to go on autopilot and starts to do the pattern recognition for you, and you don't even have to understand yourself how it achieves that. It just happens. Yeah. And that seems to be sort of a magical thing to kind of want to shoot for. I totally get that. And you've started to play around with that a little bit, right?
I've started to work on a prototype that might use a fair amount of perceptual learning. In the most basic form, I think it is just this idea of a sliver of skill. It's a very, very small skill. I'm starting with Ruby syntax, partly because Ruby is something that I know quite well. I also know quite a few newbies who are learning Ruby, and so it's easy to find someone to try it out on, which is kind of a useful thing. One of the points that Kathy makes in her talk and in her book is that you want to be exposed to hundreds of examples of good code. And in the examples, in the little exercises that I've made, I have I have hundreds of examples of both good and bad syntax. So in some ways, this might not actually meet the criteria that Kathy sets, in that I am showing you examples of bad code as well. But the feedback is very, very quick. And so I think that it might actually work in terms of letting the brain detect, is this syntactically correct, or is it syntactically, will it cause a syntax error?
So I've put it up here. And do you see it?
I see it.
So perceiving syntax, expert programmers can see at a glance that a bit of code has syntax errors. Beginners lose hours down the rabbit holes because they cannot. Now, I'm a bad person to do this with because I haven't done Ruby programming. I've lots of other languages, not Ruby, but we can try it regardless. So this is, and the idea here is that there will be eventually, like there's one right now, and the idea is that there will eventually be more than just the syntax one, potentially. Yeah. There's strings, arrays, hashes, numbers, symbols. So the idea here is like, okay, there's many ways to construct a string. There's a quote mark here that's being, well, one that's being escaped, another that's being escaped, but it's not being closed in the same way that it's open. So I'm going to say that this is an error. Yay. And this one seems pretty hunky-dory to me. So I'm going to say this one's okay. This seems a Rubyism.
Yeah, it's a Rubyism.
I'm going to claim that this is okay. Okay. Whoa. This is where it gets interesting. Okay, another Ruby thing. Okay.
Yeah, that's a message send in Ruby.
Okay, so this presumably is a parameter to the start with function. And it looks like that could work. Okay. And this looks like a typical string marker that you can use. There's a term for these, right?
Yeah, a here doc.
A here doc, yeah, that's right. I know these guys back from PHP and Perl land.
Yeah, I think Ruby got them from Perl. Ruby got a lot of interesting things from Perl.
So you keep going through these, and then you can say, okay, I'm done. Yay. It says that theoretically, I didn't get one right.
I think you quit before you actually said so you didn't get the last one because you quit before you actually answered it.
Too lazy. Okay, cool. So, and you've already done a lot of these, right? There's already quite a few of them there. And what's next for that project?
So the first thing I want to do is figure out if this actually works. The initial attempts that the experiments that I've done with some newbies suggest that it works and works really, really well. I've gotten some very enthusiastic feedback from some newbies who have gone through it very quickly, and by the end of it, they know if it's syntactically correct or not, and that's very, very interesting. I don't know if, I mean, there are so many things. There are so many ways in which the syntax, the language is very rich. Ruby is a very, very rich language syntactically, and so there's a way in which there's a ton of work that could be done just in recognizing Ruby syntax. There's also Ruby idioms, and using the standard library. It has a huge standard library, and so being able to recognize if this is a correct usage of standard library could be a useful thing. I think that there might be a more perceptual piece of saying, I'm going to show you 200 valid strings. These are all valid. Just look through them before you even get to saying valid, invalid. It might need to be more gradual. Right now, I'm mixing 4 or 5 different types of string syntax into the same very first module. It might be interesting to just do double quoted strings, just do single quoted strings, just do here docs, so that the brain is pattern matching more quickly on a smaller set of rules. There might even be a way of introducing categories of errors that are typical, and say, so that people are more quick to pattern match on, oh, this is an escaping error, or this is a method call error, or something like that. I don't know. So there's a lot of experimentation, I think, that needs to be done. If it works, there are a lot of languages that this could expand to, I think. And a lot of types of tasks. Recognition, pattern recognition, I think we use it more than we know. I was reading some of the research about how they're using perceptual learning in mathematics, in particular in algebra. And you'd think that it's not really a pattern matching type of problem, but it really is. The being able to recognize if you have a valid transformation lets you solve algebraic equations. And so I think we do a lot more pattern matching than we realize in programming.
And how do you want to get that sort of massive, large-scale feedback on whether it works or doesn't?
I'm starting out small. I want to figure out the really rough edges first with just a handful of people, and then I think the next step after I have some of the basic feedback in, I'll probably add some sort of tracking, not necessarily of who does what, but within a session, to know, how many did you get correct and how long did it take in the first 10 or the second 10 or the third 10, to see if there's a useful progression. And it's not real science at this point. Like if I were going to do real science, I'd have to have control groups and I'd have to have all sorts of things.
Do you want to integrate it with exorcism in any way?
Nope. No, I want it to be completely standalone.
That makes sense. And you talked earlier also about some of the other ways of hacking skills development in particular. And the one thing that, of course, comes up a lot is various forms of tutoring and mentorship.
Yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about your own experiences, what's worked for you in mentorship, and what you think people who design these systems need to pay attention to?
I think that, well, for my own sake, I did almost all of my learning in the first few years alone. I didn't even realize that there was a community, that there was such a thing as a community. I learned from books, and I learned from doing programming. After a few years, I had a job where I was very, very frustrated. I was frustrated with quality. I was frustrated with the thrashing that we did, with the pain of the slow progress of doing something that should have taken hours but took weeks. And I started reading everything I could come across about agile development, mostly about XP and refactoring and test-driven development. And then, being the most junior person on my team, I was like, I'm not going to be able to change this company, but maybe someone could come in and change it for me. So I called all of the, object mentor, anyone who had written a book and was running a business about how to teach teams how to do programming better. I called them up or sent them an email and asked, what it would take to bring them into the company. And of course, it would take, $20,000 and whatever, which I didn't have. So it didn't happen. But one person called me back. He was at an airport and he gave me a call and he said, I can empathize. Maybe we can't actually fix the pain that you have in your teams, but let's talk. And so we talked for 45 minutes, and then he sent me a link to an unconference, an open space conference that was just a day. It was very inexpensive, and a bunch of interesting people showed up. And so I had my first taste of community, of people who care about these things, who care deeply about these things, and learning from actual interactions with people is an incredibly powerful thing. And so after that, I decided to change languages because I wanted to be working in a language that had more of a community around it, which is how I ended up in Ruby, kind of arbitrarily. It could have been Python, it could have been any language that has more of a community than what I was working in. And then I started being a part of that community. And so that changed things. I still didn't, at that point, have any sort of experience of mentorship, but I had interactions with humans, and I think that was a very, very important thing. Maybe 3 years ago, I came across a video that blew my mind. It was a technical video. It was about object-oriented programming. I watched it, and I couldn't, I felt dizzy almost because the ideas were so big. And the person who was doing the talk had mentioned that they were also working on a book. And so I got a hold of a beta of the book. And I went through and I basically put a stream of consciousness throughout the margins of the entire book. And I sent it to them. I didn't know them at the time. But I sent it to them as sort of like, here's my perspective as someone who is fairly raw at programming. I've only been doing it a few years. This might be helpful. And that turned out to be incredibly helpful to them. And we spent 2.5 hours on a hangout talking about the feedback, like digging into various aspects of that feedback. So it was a very useful thing. And then later, right around that time, I got accepted to do my first conference talk. And so this person was like, well, I've done several conference talks. I can help you out. And I can help you out turned out to be, I would go off and do a bunch of work. And every once in a while, I'd check in. And this person would say, They'd ask a pointed question, and I'd go off and do a ton of work again. I'd come back, and they'd ask another question. I go, that's really interesting. That's very, difficult. I have no idea. Go off and do a bunch of research, come back. And so it wasn't really, they didn't like sit down and, feed me how to do conference talks, but they checked in just enough. They had their experience to lean on. And I think this is the first time that I felt really deeply that I had a mentorship relationship with someone where I was doing the work, but their experience was really a powerful thing. And my talk was miles and miles better than it ever would have been without that feedback and guidance.
Yeah, and I have to say, for any viewers who haven't watched any of Katrina's talk, you absolutely should. Like the work that you put into them is really very, very visible. It's really clear that, holy crap, like there's someone here who cares to give a great experience to the audience. So huge kudos to you for the quality of those presentations. They're truly excellent work.
Thank you.
And so when it comes to mentorship, one of the examples that you mentioned was the story of Michael Faraday, which is something that Robert Greene writes about in Mastery. And what's interesting to me, when I heard you talking, I also saw the connection to some of the things that Faraday did. He also made a big point of like processing what he was listening to from his mentor and turning it into a book of his own. Yeah. And Robert Greene talks a lot about how this is something that we should all do when we read materials or when we listen. We should engage with the material very actively, that this is one of the best ways to sort of kick the brain into gear in a serious way and to not just be in this passive consumer mode. But one of the other points that he makes is that Faraday really put a lot of effort into that relationship. Like he sought out his mentor, he built the relationship, he spent years in this apprenticeship relationship, and then he actually ended the relationship when it was no longer serving his needs well. What is that an important lesson for you there as well?
I think the most important lesson to me with Michael Faraday's story is that he did all the work. Humphrey Davies, his mentor, he might not even have known that he was his mentor. He was a celebrity chemist. He was doing his work, touring Europe and doing experiments. And Michael Faraday did all the work of, he joined the lab as like the lowly assistant who had to, prep chemicals and do the dishes and take the guy's tailoring to he did all the crap work. And he did it so that he could be in the same room as this guy, observe how he thinks, observe how he works, and get any sort of guidance, because after a very short amount of time, Humphrey Davies relied on Michael Faraday because he was so good at what he did. He was so conscientious. He was so smart, and he knew what he was doing, and he learned very, very quickly and systematically. I think that this story, to me, illustrates how incredibly important it is to take charge of your own learning. That if you want to be in a mentorship relationship, first of all, it helps for that to be someone it's not a cold call. By the time Michael Faraday became Humphrey Davies' assistant, he'd been introduced several times. He had seen some of Davies' lectures. He had taken notes during the lectures, made them into a beautiful book, bound it, and given it to him. Humphrey Davies knew who this person was. He had some idea of the quality of his work. It wasn't just some rando who came in and said, "Hey, can you be my mentor?" Which is, I think, what a lot of people might think mentoring is. Like, what I hear a lot, how do I find a mentor? And what it sounds like when I dig a little bit deeper is, it sounds like they're looking for someone who can shelter and protect them and give them everything they need and spoon feed them every detail so that they can learn. And I totally get it. I understand. It's so exhausting. It's so terrifyingly difficult to learn, and there are so many resources, and it's overwhelming. And I've had that feeling, that drowning feeling of like, I'm never going to learn at all, and I'm always going to be behind. I'm going to be 25 years behind all the other people who started programming before they could walk. And it's never going to be okay. It's never going to be over. I don't know where to begin. I don't know how to take the first step. And the thing is, I don't think that it's anybody else's job to take that first step for you. However, I think that a lot can be done. A mentorship relationship, I think, has to go both ways. I think that if you think about it in terms of what the other person needs, Humphrey Davies needed an assistant. He needed someone who was meticulous and who understood the chemistry and could do all the prep work. And that's what he needed, and he got that. And then Michael Faraday was able to, in that relationship, absorb all of the things that he wanted to, in terms of learning, in terms of science, in terms of, he traveled Europe with Humphrey Davies and on some of his tours and met other scientists. He got a ton of things out of that relationship, that it wasn't Humphrey Davies just being kind and offering up his time for Michael Faraday. And I think that if someone wants to learn in programming or in open source, I think it's absolutely possible to go and do work in such a way that someone else is getting something from it, and building up that trust relationship, so that when you do have something you're working on and a question you want to ask, they'll know who you are. They'll be comfortable with knowing that you have put in your part of the work, that they're not just leaking their own time into your life to help you out, and that it's never going to be something that you return. There are enough people out there who are vultures, who will take all the time that they can get. Yeah. And it's really hard for someone who, especially someone who has some visibility, I think, for people who are maintainers of some of these the frameworks that thousands of businesses use to earn money on top of. I think if some of the people who have a lot of visibility, if they have I bet you they have random people who come in and ask them for favors all day long, every day. And I think it would be a very different thing if someone came in and just, I don't know, triaged issues for them on one of their projects and discovered that, oh, there's this question that gets asked repeatedly. I could go write some documentation for this and submit a pull request, or just be there and help unstick people. And then they'd learn a lot about that project. They'd start to get to know the project a little bit more. They'd have opportunities to submit little pull requests to help debug things, and they would gain familiarity. Their username on GitHub or wherever would start being a familiar face to this person who has a lot of visibility. And at that point, it's a lot easier to ask someone for a pointer or for some help and actually get that.
That makes sense, like proving your own value, especially to the true masters in their field. What's next for you, Katrina? One of the things that you mentioned is that you've been working on a book for a while now. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm working on a book called 99 Bottles of Object-Oriented Programming. Sandy Metz and I have been working on this content for a couple years now. It came out of some of the early exorcism things. The 99 Bottles of Beer song is just one of those exercises that is kind of fun. And I was seeing so many terrible examples of code to solve it. And for a while I was thinking there might not be a good solution to this problem. It might just all be horrible. And the interesting problem is how, like, what rug do people sweep their code under in this problem? And Sandy took that as a challenge. She was like, no, there has to be a good solution. And so we went back and forth, and we'd spend, weekends where we were both just solving the problem over and over again. Then we'd get in a hangout and we'd say, oh, I love that. Oh, I hate that. Why did you do that? And then back and forth. And we just explored this problem very, very deeply and discovered that there are deep, simple, very powerful lessons about object-oriented programming in the 99 Bottles of Beer song. And so that turned into a course. People were begging Sandy Metz to come into their, businesses and teach their developers. And so we put together curriculum, developed this curriculum centered a lot around the 99 Bottles song, but also other nursery rhymes and songs. And we taught that several times. She's taught it with other people as well. She's taught alone. And through teaching, we've sort of figured out what the contents of this, what are the lessons in this song. So we're turning that into a book.
I suspect any book with the title 99 Bottles of Beer will sell among programmers.
There's a good chance.
You have some official book swag already?
We have book swag. It's kind of awesome. This is a sticker. Let me see. Can you see that?
Wow, code responsibly. That's very cool.
Yeah, I'm very proud of that. So, I cannot give proper credit because I cannot remember the name of the designer, but it's really great. We're also having the same designer do some of the art for the book.
And when did you say it's coming?
That's I didn't. We're hoping to get it into beta soon-ish. So in the next couple of months, we've got a lot of work done. There's a lot more to do, but I think that we can start showing people and selling an early version in a couple of months.
That sounds great. Well, thank you for talking with us about exorcism, about hacking skills. I'm really excited about what's next. Things like the experiment, which also has a name, right? What was it?
Skillflake. Little flakes of skill. Yeah.
Okay. So Skillflake coming soon. Try it out when it's released. And please, for those of you who do know how to code and can contribute or also can help with documentation or exercises, please take a look at the Exorcism code base. Always looking for help and support. Check out Katrina's talk and check out Exorcism. Thank you again, Katrina, for sharing your passion with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.